They thought we were primitive, predictable, a species of soft skin and softer will. They studied our biology, not our fury, our history, not our silence. They mistook patience for weakness, diplomacy for surrender. But history won't remember their arrogance. It will remember the women, the ones they hanged without names, the ones whose deaths didn't end the story, but ignited it. It will remember the whispers, the ones that moved faster than light, from dying colonies to forgotten satellites, the ones that carried a simple message: Earth remembers. And what came next wasn't war. It was something far more terrifying. What if the greatest conflict in galactic history wasn't fought with fleets or fire, but with memory? A virus made of stories, a retaliation built from silence, a reckoning encoded not in weapons, but in the way we refuse to be erased. This isn't fiction. This isn't theory. This is a record that was never supposed to be found. Told in fragments, scattered transmissions, buried reports, and the kinds of questions powerful empires don't want you to ask. Why did their ships shut down mid-flight? Why did entire planets surrender without a shot? Why does the Dominion now fear the very name of Earth? Listen carefully, because what you're about to witness is only the beginning. And by the time this ends, you may not see humanity the same way again. Not as victims, not even as survivors, but as something else entirely. Something the galaxy will never underestimate again. At the center of Gizmo Prime lies a square that does not echo. A place carved not for justice, but for forgetting. The Obsidian Plaza. Stone polished so smooth it reflects nothing. No sky. No sun. No memory. The Empire built it without windows, without sound. Because judgment, in their eyes, was never about truth, only efficiency. The guards arrived before dawn, six-legged, plated in pale gold, their helmets shaped like skulls from extinct beasts, symbolic, perhaps, or maybe just cruel. Their movements were rehearsed, like theater. But this was no performance. This was a ritual. 10 women, barefoot, human, escorted in silence down the spine of the plaza. The air was not cold, but still, they shivered not from fear, but from how deeply the silence had burrowed into the bones of the place. Each wore a simple gray robe, the same shade as the prison walls they had last seen. Their wrists were bound behind them with red fiber, the Empire's signature restraint, softer than silk, but able to cut through flesh if resisted. They were called enemy agents, saboteurs. But no one had ever spoken to them. No charges were read. No names confirmed. Their voices had been stripped before the trial that never happened. And so, they walked. Without defense. Without identity. Without even the dignity of being called by the names they were born with. One of them stumbled. Another hummed the sound thin, trembling, breaking halfway through each breath. A third clenched her jaw so hard blood ran from her gums. None wept. Overhead, a single surveillance drone drifted, its lens cracked from age or impact. It blinked red once every 4 seconds. Each blink was a record. Each record, a wound waiting to be opened. No crowd had gathered. There was no audience. No fanfare. Because this was not a message for the masses. It was meant for one species only. Earth. And even then, it wasn't supposed to be seen. The execution platform rose from the stone like a monolith. 10 poles. 10 ropes. 10 ends. The women were arranged in a perfect arc, mathematically symmetrical. Like chess pieces before a game that had already been lost. There was no signal. No countdown. Only a gesture. The ropes pulled tight. And in that moment, one breath, one last act of resistance, the woman in the center lifted her head, looked straight into the fractured drone, and whispered, "Earth remembers." Her voice cracked on the second word. But it didn't matter. Because truth, real truth, does not need to shout. It just needs to exist. And now, it did. Broadcast. Copied. Archived. And, despite every effort, shared. The feed was cut within seconds. The file deleted. The orders issued. No copies. No traces. No further action required. But on a distant asteroid station, a mechanic had already seen it. And copied it. And sent it. To a warlord with a scar that never healed. To a pilot whose sister vanished during the first expansion wave. To a rogue AI that still remembered the scent of its designer. By the time the sun had risen fully over Gizmo Prime, the message had reached 17 different networks. Some legal, most not. And more than 200,000 humans had already whispered it back into the dark. Earth remembers. And Earth did. There was no declaration. No banners raised. No horns of war echoing through space. Only a pause. Too brief to notice. Too quiet to fear. Until it was too late. At the edge of Dominion territory, a freighter registered as civilian crossed into restricted space. The ship did not answer hails. Its engine signature flickered, first blue, then red, then nothing. Scanners showed nothing wrong. But it vanished. Not exploded. Not hijacked. Just gone. 2 days later, a communications relay sector Theta 7 glitched. Once. Then again. Then every light turned green, and the transmission feed fell silent. Technicians thought it was solar interference. Command called it coincidence. The Empire did what it always did, ignored it. Until the Velf rose. An Imperial patrol ship. Medium class. Standard crew of 31. She was scheduled to report at 0200. By 0210, a backup drone was sent. The ship was found floating. Lights off. Engines idle. Power stable. But the crew were all alive. Bound. Gagged. Locked inside their own escape pods placed there by unknown hands. Weapons missing. Navigation wiped. Mainframe cracked open like a skull. Not a single drop of blood. And that terrified them more. A threat you can see, you can fight. But this was precision without ego. Silence without mercy. The files were marked low-level sabotage. The officers said, "Pirates." But pirates steal. These intruders studied. Then it happened again. Another ship. And another. By the end of the week, 8. Each vessel perfectly disabled. Crews left breathing barely. And each incident left one thing behind. A symbol. Burned into a console. A triangle broken at the top, like a blade snapped mid-swing. Earth's old rebel mark, once outlawed, now myth. They didn't understand it. But it spread. In secret war rooms carved deep into asteroids, Dominion commanders whispered. They are sending a message. They want us to fear shadows. They won't face us directly. And they were right. Because the humans had no fleet. No state. No flag. Only memory. Only grief. Only skill. A ship once used to smuggle frozen cattle now carried nanovirus payloads. A forgotten mining rig was refitted with cloaking mesh and EMP mines. Civilian transports that used to deliver tea, medicine, or refugees now armed with black market tech and phantom drives. Somehow, somewhere, Earth had stopped being a world and become a network. Below the surface of a long-dead nuclear base, 12 individuals gathered around a war table lit by amber screens. None wore uniforms. None spoke until spoken to. General Tom Miller stood at the head. He did not raise his voice. He only lifted a data slate glowing with the Dominion's latest report and said, "They still don't know how we fight." The room didn't laugh. It inhaled. Beside him, a scientist adjusted his cracked glasses. They outnumber us. 100 to 1. Miller placed the slate down gently. He smiled, not with joy, but the kind of smile carved in a fox's bones. "They are an empire," he said. "We're a problem." Inside the command deck of the Dominion's dreadnought Sovereign Wrath, silence reigned, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that squeezes. 100 glowing consoles blinked in unnatural rhythm, like a heart losing sync. Supreme Commander Ral Vader stood motionless. His obsidian armor reflected nothing. The light in the chamber bent away from him, like it, too, feared being seen. His 4 crimson eyes scanned the reports. One after another. Ship status, missing. Crew, found alive, bound. Message left, none. Or perhaps, too many. He did not blink. He did not speak. But his mandibles clicked, not from hunger, but from a creeping irritation. Like static in the blood. Pirates, they had said. Insurgents. But he knew pirates did not operate with surgical silence. Rebels did not coordinate across 3 sectors without a single transmission. No, this wasn't disobedience. It was design. "Bring me the names of the women we executed," he growled. The words fell into the air like broken metal. A young officer hesitated. His skin shimmered with anxiety. "Sir, there were no names." Ral Vader turned his head slowly. Not like a man, but like a predator. No records. His voice had no sharpness. It was too smooth. Like glass being pressed into the skin. The officer swallowed. "We were told they were irrelevant." "Find them," Vader said. There was no shout. But the air in the room changed. The temperature shifted by degrees no sensor recorded. The silence thickened. And yet, it was already too late. Earth had begun to move. Not as a military, but as a force. Not a storm, but a virus. Invisible, precise, coordinated, alive. In the hollowed remains of a decommissioned asteroid, war maps flickered to life. Not holograms. Real maps. Paper. Pen. Fiberboard walls. Analog by design. Because you can't hack what doesn't exist in code. No titles. No medals. Just faces. Some worn by time. Some masked. Some burned by past wars they were never supposed to win. But they were all thinking the same thing. Never again. And while the Empire deliberated, Earth struck. The colony on Threxos 7 went dark for 9 minutes. When it came back online, the security towers were already overridden. Their defense matrix reprogrammed using their own code. Automated drones grounded themselves. Doors unlocked. Internal turrets powered down. No sirens. No smoke. Only a new voice on the intercom. This facility is now under human jurisdiction. No uniforms were seen. Only boots. And breath. And eyes that had waited too long to be heard. By the time the governor tried to initiate lockdown, every security file had already been corrupted. His command credentials played on loop, rewritten into a nursery rhyme. 10 ropes. 1 whisper. Earth remembers. He surrendered. No one died. No blood spilled. No structures damaged. But something far worse happened. The colony lost its faith. Not in its weapons. Not in its leaders. But in the idea that the Empire could protect them at all. Across 12 sectors, the same message was whispered through hijacked Dominion COMM channels. Surrender, and you will be spared. Resist, and we take you apart. Piece by piece. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. One spoken in a language the Empire had forgotten. Retribution. The Dominion called it terrorism. A string of isolated acts. Uncivilized. Uncoordinated. A flailing species striking back before extinction. But across the void, in quiet channels and encrypted frequencies, others were watching. Old enemies. Old ghosts. The Vihari were first. Once hired blades feared, blood-soaked mercenaries who sold loyalty by the hour. They had no flag. No cause. No memory. But they had seen the footage. The executions. The whispers. And they changed course. No warning. No price. Just a single transmission to Earth's black network. We are listening. Their ships veered mid-contract, abandoning Dominion cargo runs and military escorts. Not for money. Not for favor. But for something very old that had been sleeping inside them. Respect. A week later, the 77th Imperial Border Fleet defected. 32 warships. Gone overnight. Their commanding officers stood in their hangar, facing a projection of Earth's fractured triangle symbol. They didn't speak. They didn't bow. They simply raised their hands, right fist over heart. The ancient gesture. The human one. In the High Council chambers of the Dominion, panic curdled beneath polished language. Screens glowed. Maps bled red. Reports piled. And the senators shouted. They are not rebelling. They are retaliating. This is organized. No, this is personal. Some dismissed the claims. Primitive attacks. Insignificant. Earth has no real fleet. They'll burn out. They always do. But the smarter ones, the quieter ones, were already looking at evacuation protocols. Because across the stars, the rules were bending. Worlds that had once bowed low now watched Earth with new eyes. Eyes that had only ever seen shame now saw defiance. And something even more dangerous. Possibility. Human ships appeared in places they shouldn't have reached. Old mining tunnels repurposed into launch points. Cargo vessels modified beyond recognition, armored with black market scrap and whisper-thin shielding. Scanners couldn't detect them. Patterns couldn't predict them. They struck deep. Not loud, but clean. Targeted. Precise. A Dominion listening station on a dead moon blinked out in 37 seconds. Not a single body recovered. But every Dominion broadcast for the next 24 hours played the same audio loop. We don't need to be everywhere. Just where it matters. An orbital outpost on Kelryan 6 lost its entire command staff to an unknown infiltrator. The surveillance system caught only one frame. A silhouette in a stolen uniform. Walking away from the command bridge. A match lit in one hand. And a data drive swinging like a pendulum from the other. It wasn't our firepower that made them nervous. It wasn't our numbers, we had none. It was something worse. It was the fact that they couldn't understand us. Couldn't predict us. Couldn't tell if we were soldiers or survivors or monsters or just humans too tired of being polite. To them, war was order. But we were something messy. Something wilder. Something that had been quiet too long. And now the silence was over. The Indomitable drifted in the dark like it belonged there. Its hull was matte black, pockmarked with signs of age and war, but humming faintly alive in ways Dominion ships could never be. Inside, the bridge lights were dim. Intentionally. Shadows ruled here. Colonel Reyes stood near the observation pane, arms crossed, watching empty space like it was lying to her. "They are setting a trap," she said. Her voice was low, steady, but her eyes were sharp. Unblinking. General Miller didn't even look up. He tapped a knuckle on the metal table once. Twice. "Of course they are," he murmured. "And we're better at it." They waited. Across the void, the Dominion fleet began to arrive, first one ship, then 5, then dozens. Massive vessels, glowing with blue ion trails, perfectly aligned. Discipline in motion. Bravado turned into formation. Each ship identical in design. Gleaming. Optimized. Overconfident. Sensors on the Indomitable blinked once, then went quiet. Miller didn't blink. They had sent an entire armada. Enough to level 3 planets. Enough to make a statement. Enough to crush anything conventional. But Earth was never conventional. Inside the Dominion command ship Vigilance, the air changed. First a flicker. Then a stutter in the lights. Then total silence. Not the natural kind. The kind that presses in. Screens went dark. Engines quieted. Emergency lights refused to turn on. Crew members tapped controls that no longer responded. Their own uniforms felt tighter somehow, as if the gravity had shifted. "Sir," an officer whispered, barely audible. "We've been hacked." His voice cracked halfway through the sentence. No one answered. But the speakers overhead did. A voice came through the internal comms, clear, casual, human. Young. Male. Cheerful. "Hi," it said. "Welcome to the first intergalactic cyber war." There was a pause. "You lose." Inside the disabled ships, hatches popped open with gentle hisses. Not explosions. Just clicks. Like doors unlocking after curfew. From the ventilation shafts and access tunnels, human teams emerged. Not soldiers in shiny armor. Tactical gear, scavenged tech, dark visors. No insignia. No names. They moved like smoke. Planted charges like gardeners. Didn't speak. Dominion soldiers tried to resist. But their rifles locked. Their suits froze. Their orders didn't send. A dozen were found later locked inside their own escape pods, stripped of command codes, watching helplessly as countdowns blinked to 0, and then stopped. No explosions. Just lights that went off, and never came back. Back on the Indomitable, Reyes let out a slow exhale. She leaned against the console and shook her head with disbelief. "I can't believe that worked." Miller finally looked up. His expression was unreadable. Not smug. Not proud. Just focused. Old and patient. "We don't fight fair," he said. "We fight smart." Then he turned back to the map, already planning the next strike. The battlefield shifted without warning. There were no fleets in orbit. No boots on ground. Just numbers corrupted. Frequencies twisted. Systems bleeding silently from within. A Dominion trade hub blinked out for 7 seconds. That was all it took. Shipping manifests scrambled. Credit exchanges jammed. Cargo rerouted into dead space. On the edge of Sector 9, fuel depots misread calibration codes. Too much pressure. Too little coolant. 3 outposts went dark, not with fire, but with absence. Stock markets began to stutter. At first, minor anomalies. Then corrections. Then full collapse. Trade ships arrived at docks only to find their buyers bankrupt. Warehouses filled with food no one could afford. Ships floated idle not for lack of engines, but for lack of orders. Inside a Dominion war room, screens glowed crimson. The air was thick with static and sweat. A senior officer slammed his hand on the table. "They are collapsing our economy." But no one was listening. In a bunker somewhere far beneath the crust of a forgotten moon, Lucas Vance leaned back in his chair, arms behind his head, smiling like a man who had seen God and taught him how to code. "You ever heard of short selling?" he asked. Colonel Reyes blinked. "You weaponized the scam." Vance shrugged. "No, I weaponized fear." Behind him, a massive display showed Dominion financial data dipping, glitching, vanishing line by line. Their credit systems weren't just cracking, they were turning against themselves. Algorithm against algorithm. Trust unraveling faster than any virus. The Empire had always built itself on control. Structure. Order. Dominate the trade. Own the system. Crush the variables. But humans didn't bring variables. They brought chaos. And chaos can't be predicted. The Dominion Senate chamber pulsed with flickering blue light. Once, it had been the heart of galactic law, echoing with order, with power, with fear. Now it echoed with panic. Dozens of senators argued in overlapping chaos. Some shouted for immediate retaliation. Others begged for retreat. A few sat silently, watching the flames of a civilization they thought unshakable. Above them all, the Emperor sat high upon his obsidian throne. He did not speak. His claws drummed slowly against the carved stone armrest. Tap, 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 like a metronome counting down to extinction. One display screen cracked with a loud snap. Too much data. Too little power. A simple overload, but the sound made everyone flinch. Below the chamber, another starport had just gone dark. Another storage hub had rerouted all resources back to Earth-controlled sectors. Another governor had defected. And above it all, the holomaps glowed with red. Not just where Earth had struck, but where Dominion control had simply evaporated. A senator stood, shaking with desperation. "We must end this war." Another snarled back. "There's no war to end. We've already lost." But the Emperor remained silent. His breathing was steady. Too steady. His eyes unfocused, as if staring through the walls, through the stars, through the centuries. He remembered the beginning. The rise. The glory. How easily they conquered. How thoroughly they underestimated. They thought Earth would scream. Instead, Earth listened. Waited. Learned. Then moved with the patience of something ancient. With the rage of something human. Ral Vader entered through the lower archway. His exoskeleton was scorched from battle. One of his upper mandibles hung cracked, barely functional. But his spine was straight. His hands steady. He moved to the center of the chamber and knelt one knee against the polished obsidian, his head bowed slightly. "The humans have given us a deadline," he said, voice low. "If we refuse, the Dominion ends." No one replied. Because everyone already knew. This wasn't surrender. This was survival. The kind that comes after pride. The kind that comes when you're no longer trying to win, just to be remembered. There would be no hero's last stand. No redemption arc. Only a quiet breath. And the moment after. The Emperor's chamber was carved from moonstone and shadow. Its walls bore the stories of centuries etched in the bloodlines of empires past. Now, the room was cold. Not from temperature, but from the absence of power. A single COMM terminal activated at the base of the throne. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a soft ping like a drop of water in a deep cave. A hollow image materialized. General Tom Miller. Human. Unshaven. Calm. He was seated casually in a steel chair. No armor. No ceremony. Just a chipped mug of coffee in one hand, steam still rising. He sipped once, then looked up. "Well," he said, with dry amusement. "This is awkward." The Emperor's jaw tensed. He sat tall, wings partially unfurled, as if posture could still suggest control. "You demand surrender?" he asked, voice lined with centuries of pride. Miller tilted his head, casually. "No. Let's call it restructuring." The room darkened slightly. A system somewhere failed. No one moved to fix it. "And if I refuse?" the Emperor asked again, slower this time. Miller's face didn't change, but something colder crept into his eyes. "Then tomorrow, you won't even have a throne to sit on." He leaned back, placing the mug down gently, like he had all the time in the world. "See, the difference between you and us, Your Majesty, is that you still think this is about power. It's not. This is about memory. You forgot what we are?" The Emperor's claws dug into the stone, cracking the edge. "And what are you?" he whispered. Miller's voice dropped a tone. Not threatening. Just inevitable. "We are the answer to your mistake." In orbit, half the Dominion fleet was already offline. Earth's shadow networks had embedded deep, disabling navigation, corrupting targeting, bleeding systems dry from the inside. Supply chains snapped. Internal riots flared. Entire planets went dark, not because they were attacked, but because no one came to help. The throne room went still. The Emperor, once master of 1,000 worlds, finally exhaled. The kind of breath you take when you know the end has already happened, and you're only now catching up to it. "Very well," he said, barely audible. The hollow of General Miller didn't smile. He just nodded. "Good choice." And then he vanished. Just like the Empire. It began with 10 nameless women. No weapons. No uniforms. Just silence. And that silence echoed across 1,000 systems louder than any war cry. No armies were raised. No invasions launched. No cities turned to ash. And yet, an empire fell. Not in fire, but in fear. Not from battle, but from the weight of its own forgotten crimes. They never saw it coming, because they didn't think stories could be weapons. They didn't think grief could outmaneuver fleets. They didn't think memory could kill. But it did. The Dominion unraveled. Piece by piece. Command by command. Trust by trust. And all because they made one mistake. They thought humanity was too small to matter. But now, the galaxy knows. And you. Now that you've heard it. Now that you've seen what happened. You have to wonder. Was this really the end? Or was it just the first time the galaxy opened its eyes? How many more stories are still hidden? How many more whispers are waiting in the dark? What do you believe? Was Earth right to retaliate? Was this justice, or revenge? And if another empire makes the same mistake, will we do it again? Let us know in the comments. Not just what you think but what you feel. Fear? Pride? Doubt? Hope? And if you're still watching, ask yourself this. If someone erased your name, burned your story, hanged your people and called it order, what would you do? If your planet remembered?